Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together, we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World, I'm speaking with my dear friend Cyndi O'Meara, best-selling author of Changing Habits, Changing Lives, nutritionist, activist, filmmaker, educator, TEDx speaker, and founding of Changing Habits, a whole food company, and also Changing Habits Farm. She's a thought leader pushing the boundaries of our understanding of what is good food, and she uncovers what's wrong with our current food system and why it's making us so sick. For Cyndi, everything begins and ends with food. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did talking with her. Thank you so much for joining me today, Cyndi. It's just such a delight to have you on the Sense Making in a Changing World show. We met a few years ago, actually on your farm, and since then we've just started having so many conversations all the time about food. What is food? What is real food? Where does that vitality in food come from? So I wanted to take this opportunity to dive in and really pick your brains from your background in nutrition and all the research you've done about the connection between nutrition and permaculture, and the connection between what is the real food that we need to nourish our bodies with the kind of food that we can grow ourselves and that is also helping to support, regeneration of soil systems and planetary systems. So we can kind of go anywhere within that. But maybe just start, like, what got you into talking about food in the first place? I know you wrote Changing Lives, Changing Habits way back, over 20 years ago now.
Yeah. I actually wrote Changing Habits, Changing Lives as a columnist in the Sunshine Coast Daily, which is where we live. Both of us live on the Sunshine Coast. Well, I guess you're part of the Sunny Coast.
Yeah, the hinterland of Sunshine Coast. Yeah.
So, I started writing for the paper in 1990 and 1991, and very controversial column. Got lots of letters to the editor that just said, oh, really, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a lunatic, all the way to, oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of common sense, to being sued by the Margarine Association and being told I couldn't write about artificial sweeteners because we'd be sued by Coca-Cola or someone like that. So I did that for 2 years. And when the last article I wrote, I just went, you know what? If you're not going to print the truth, I don't want to work for you anymore, because I want to tell the truth. So after 104 weeks as a columnist, 104 weeks, I looked at it and I went, there's a book in this. So I created a book, and then threw it out to Penguin and HarperCollins and Random House, and nobody wanted it. I think 35 publishers in Australia I sent it out to, and nobody wanted it, so I shelved it. So that's where Changing Habits, Changing Lives came from, basically. And that's like, what are we at now, 2020? Where 30 years ago was when I started to talk about it. But what got me interested in nutrition was I wanted to go skiing, and I wanted to go to university. That's what got me interested. So the only place I knew to do that was in Boulder, Colorado, at the University of Colorado. So I flew over there as a 19-year-old. That was 1980. Flew over there and picked elective classes as well as did my science classes, because I was doing pre-med. And one of the electives I did was anthropology. I was mesmerized by the food man ate, how it evolved, how we used food, how civilization happened because of food, how food was such an integral part of survival. And that's when I thought I'll be a nutritionist. So I came back to Australia, studied my Bachelor of Science, finishing up my Bachelor of Science, majoring in nutrition to become a dietitian. And it had nothing to do with historical perspective. Had nothing to do with, it was margarine, low fat, artificial sweeteners, all of that stuff. And I remember one of the things I did was, when I was at the university, is I took a 2-month sabbatical from university and did something called Outward Bound. Did it through the Colorado Rockies, onto Utah, into Arizona and Nevada, and learnt about land management. I remember writing in my journal as a 21-year-old that I wanted to have a farm when I got home. So that was my first real thought of, I want to grow my own food. But I came home, went to university, went on to university, married a chiropractor who nothing to do with the land, wanted a boat. And so I never got that opportunity. And so it wasn't until I guess that longing to have a farm happened to me 5 years ago. And that was when my real understanding of permaculture, organic foods, or the organic movement, regenerative farming, all started to come about. So before that, it was all about food. After it had left the farm, and it was all about food. Yes, I was about organic. Yes, I was about whole foods. Yes, I was about that. But I knew nothing about what happened before it. Like, I'd had a trial at a few herbs. My mum was a corn farmer's daughter, the oldest of 11, so she was from farming. I'd been to pig farms because my uncles were pig farmers. So I'd seen it, but it wasn't until I did it myself that the reality of where our food comes from is probably more important than what we are consuming. Mm-hmm. And I have to sing your praises here. So I get this farm, 60 acres in Reeseville, Sunshine Coast. I watched Jurassic Park happen. I I had been told that I should get Echo Goat in and Echo this in and Echo, and they come in and they go, oh, yeah, we'll get the goats in, but we'll use Roundup. Oh, yeah, we're going to do this, but we're going to use Roundup. And I rang Costa because I knew Costa, and I rang Costa and I said, Costa, do you want to do a partnership with me and just, grow food on my farm? And he goes, you've got one of the best people right near you. Her name is Morag. And I went, okay, give me her number. Let me ring her. So Jurassic Park was growing up everywhere around me. I had no idea what I was doing, and you walked into my life. And we walked around that farm, and I could cry on that day. I still cry to this very minute because you saved me from selling that farm. And you just said, this is easy, Cyndi. This isn't weeds. These are, I think you called them primaries or opportunities.
Pioneers.
Because I hear them now as opportunists, pioneers, all these words people say. So you just said they're pioneers. They're here. They're telling you a story. And these are your options. And I ran with your options. I took one of your options. I ran with it, and I have never looked back.
Right.
So you were instrumental in making my dream come true when my dream was becoming a disaster.
Yes, Cyndi.
It was a disaster.
And it is such a beautiful farm, and what you're doing there is just so remarkable, and how you're able to actually use that farm as a platform for communicating a different way of seeing food, and where, bringing people onto that farm as well, because you run a Whole Foods company now. You also run a Whole Foods farm, and the two together are just really a fantastic platform to help to shift the thinking, and that's what I'm hearing you talking about, is this idea of disrupting the dominant paradigm of where we talk about food and where we think about food and how food is taught. I mean, I understand that still in a lot of nutrition courses, the old style of thinking about food still comes through. So I'm hoping that it's changing somewhat. But so I don't know. But you also run something called a functional nutrition course. So that talks differently about what is nutrition and what it means to be a dietitian. Can you tell us what functional nutrition means and what vitality means and all what that has to do with gut biomes and all of that kind of thing?
Well, I wanted to educate, but I'm not a qualified teacher. I haven't got a PhD. I'm a nutritionist that has a thirst for knowledge. I've done human anatomy. I did 6 years of uni, but basically, I'm a Bachelor of Science majoring in nutrition. So I found somebody who could write the course beside me. We spent a year together. He was incredible, Dr. Stephen Myers, and he's still head of our course. He still looks at it, edits it, does things that need to be done to it. But he came into my life, and for a year we sat beside each other putting this course together. So it's a 12-month course, but it's run on the principles of anthropology and vitalism. So anthropology is, what's the historical perspective of this food? Did we eat it? And there's been this whole debacle last week. I don't know when this is going to go up, but there was a debacle in 2020 about salt, white refined salt versus pink salt. And there was a whole scientific article about it. They were saying pink salt's dangerous. It's got heavy metals. It's unpredictable. It's this, it's that. White salt, on the other hand, that's refined with anti-caking agents and potassium iodate in it, is a healthier option. So me immediately, I don't need to read the science. I just go, well, anthropologically wise, we've been using salt for probably 4,500 years that we know in the literature. It was used as preservation, for survival, for warriors, as celery, which is in Norwich and places like that, all meant there was salt that was available to us. So my thoughts was, I know the history of salt. You cannot tell me that a natural commodity that's been going for 4,500 years is terrible compared to this white refined salt. So I do historical perspective, and then I do vitalistic. So this is the principles of the Nutrition Academy. Look at the historical perspective, look at the vitalistic nature of it, You can go and read the science, which I did, by the way. Here's the science article. It goes forever. So I've read the whole thing. I just got to show you. Well, it just goes forever, the pages. It keeps going and going and going. It's brilliant science on analysing salt. But there's no double-blind placebo study that has somebody eating white salt and the other one eating pink salt. So how can you say that, white salt's better than pink salt? So this was the foundation. This is the whole foundation. And this foundation not only is the foundation of eating, but it's the foundation of growing food as well. What's the historical perspective? How did we grow those foods? What were their companions? What did a weed do? How did we prepare that food? Even grain, if we're growing grain, how was it prepared? Well, people knew not to eat it raw. They knew it had to be fermented or soaked or something done to it. That food that we picked from the ground, it wasn't sterilized. There was, we weren't scared of bacteria. All this beautiful bacteria is on those leaves. When I pick my leaves, I don't even wash them. I pick those little worms and those little things off. I'll throw them away. But I want that soil bacteria, because that soil bacteria on my lettuce leaf or on my herb or on my root vegetables, I'll take the dirt off. Don't get me wrong. No, we'll take that off. But that is, to me, what gives us our microbiome. So the soil ecology, the ecology of my gut is what we teach in the Nutrition Academy. And what's really exciting in the Nutrition Academy, as well as having the fundamentals, the applied, we've also got the intro course, we've got the microbiome course. We also have this incredible edible garden course. Because I actually felt that people need to know how to grow their own foods. They need to know where their foods is coming from. And just for everybody to know, is Morag's course, Incredible Edible Garden. Who else would I have on there? Nobody else. I can't create that course. That's not my forte. That's your forte.
The thing about noticing the vitality too, that when you look at your garden and you're looking at that food that you're about to harvest, like if you see a whole lot of plants in your garden and some are kind of a little bit yellowy and floppy and there's others that are really vital and vibrant, which one are you drawn to actually go and harvest from? You're going to be drawn to the one that is just springing with life and is strong and is actually not so bug-eaten. And why is it that that's strong? Because it has the really strong soil microbiome, like there's life in the soil that's supporting that. And so that you're going to be accessing so much more nutrients. Like that food that you're going to get is going to be far more nutrient dense than anything else. Is going to have so much more vitality for you to consume and your health. So there's this strong relationship between the health of the soil and the health of you, and then that returns back again. And so there's this bringing them together like this, understanding the nutrition, understanding of our internal health, the planetary health, and the soil health in our garden. And you can begin to understand everything that's going on in the world by simply just being in relationship with your garden and your food. And it starts there. And then all of these other connections start to take place. And, I after watching your film, the What's with Wheat as well, and, I'd like to dive into that a little bit, because you just went down every single rabbit hole that you could about that and found so much background. I started to apply that thinking to every other type of crop that I was seeing out. So, for example, just as an intro to this, Cyndi's gone in and talked about the impact of glyphosate and the impact that that's having on our health because of it's just rife throughout the wheat industry. But what I see is that it's on so many other things. Like glyphosate is used to kill off the leafy greens, and there's other chemicals too, the leafy greens, so then you can harvest sweet potato more easily, for example. And all our foods are just kind of covered in this. And so
in Australia, it's 70 foods.
70 foods. And so actually, when you focused on wheat, this idea to ripple it out to every other kind of thinking, every other food, and think differently about, oh my gosh, how am I actually going to take control again of my food system, of the foods that I can buy organic, and I know that then it doesn't have it, but there are simpler ways as well. And we've even seen now, because of the lockdown and the cracks in our food system, that growing our food has become even more important, and people are reaching out for it because they feel through that they have a much greater sense of real security and real control over their lives, which helps to ease off the anxieties that people are feeling with all these things going on everywhere. So jumping back into What's with We, can you tell us what that story is about and what started you on that story? Because it took up like a huge chunk of your life, finding out the research, that interviewing people and putting that together.
Well, let me, I just want to make a couple of comments on what you said. Number one, I'm in awe of food and how it grows. Like my nectarine tree at the moment is gone nuts. And I look at it and I go, wow, how did you do that? And then a seed drops and my lettuce just grows without me planting it, or my coriander. And I have this incredible awe of food now since I've started growing it. So I think that's one thing I wanted to just mention with you. That was number one before I start with the we. The second thing is that when you know where your food is coming from and you take control of where it's coming from, you become a very powerful activist because you're refusing to support the multinationals that are spraying glyphosate on 70 of our foods. You refuse to support the multinationals and the elite. They're the elite who are creating genetically modified foods. You are not supporting them anymore. You are supporting that small-time farmer, and that we have many of them here on the sunny coast and around the world. You are the most incredible activist when you choose where your food is coming from, and when you take charge of the food that you are consuming. So instead of going into the grocery store and pick a pack, because that's what it is, pick a pack here, pick a pack there, you don't know where that's coming from. Your dairy might have 1,000 cows, and then that contributes another 1,000, another 1,000, another 1,000, and then you're getting your milk that's been mixed from 5,000 cows. I don't want that. I want my local dairy. So when you start to do this, you're the most incredible activist that can change the world. And this is what I got from doing everything that I've been doing. And it all started with wheat. Here we go. So almost 9 years ago, so I've always eaten well. I eat from scratch. I grow my own. I'd not grow my own food back then. Grew my herbs, but I made everything from scratch. Made my own food, so I knew where everything was coming from. Mainly, it was organic. And probably when I hit 50, which was 10 years ago, I started to put on weight, getting really sore, achy joints, tightness in my throat. I didn't realize my brain was also going, but in comparison it was. Sore back, sore right hip, dry hair that wouldn't grow. And my hair grows like I've just had about this much cut off, and it just grows so fast. Skin that was really dry. All of these things were happening. I'm going, what am I doing? Nothing's changed. Why am I such a mess at 50? This isn't 50. I'm not going to put up with this, So I went on an elimination, and I ate nothing but 500 calories. So I completely reduced what I was eating. I ate nothing but green leafy veggies. And oh my gosh, if I was doing that program now, it would all come from my farm. It would be the easiest program to do. But anyway, green leafy veggies, 100 grams of meat, no fat on it. And that's basically all I ate twice a day. And I would have a papaya in the morning. That's it. And in a week, all aches, all pains, sore back, sore hip disappeared completely. And I'm like going, wow, this is incredible. I knew food was powerful, but 1 week and all of that goes that I'd been suffering with for 18 months. Then I lost 4.5 kilos in that week. Then at the end of 3 weeks, my brain clicked in on day 10. I rang a friend of mine and I was saying weird things. She said, Cyndi, have you been doing drugs? And I went, no, I actually feel a clarity I haven't felt in a long time. So all of this was happening. And in 3 weeks, I'd lost 9 kilos, feeling fantastic. Oh my gosh, I just wanted to jump out of my skin. Started to introduce foods back in. Went to Woodford Folk Festival because I did this over Christmas. Went to Woodford Folk Festival, introduced wheat in a bread. And next day, I gained nearly 1 kilo in weight. You can't do that. You can't put that much fat on. That's water weight. That's inflammation. Sore back came back. Foggy brain came back. Felt like crap. Went, oh my gosh, what is wrong with bread, you know? So I did research. For 2 years, I listened to some incredible researchers out there, read their books, read their research, did everything. And then my husband at the end of 2 years said to me, well, do you want to write another book on that? And I went, no, I don't want to write another book. He goes, why don't you do a documentary? We knew nothing about it, but we learned really fast. All those people that I researched, I then did a video Christmas Eve, sent it out to them, just saying I'd love them in my documentary. This is my story. And Christmas Day, 3 of them came back. Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, Dr. Terry Walls, and Vandina Shiva. 3 powerful, incredible women, India, England, and the US. And then I said to all the others that hadn't said yes, they were men, emailed them and said, oh, I have these 3 incredible women. And then they all came on board, but one that I really wanted. And he had written the book Wheat Belly, and he was one of the people that I'd read, you know. So anyway, that was fine. I went around, traveled the world. There was 4 of us that traveled and did interviews, and then, did the editing, had a great editor here on the Sunshine Coast, had a great producer. He traveled with me. It was just one of the most incredible experiences of my life. But we got to our last interview, and it was Dr. Stephanie Seneff at MIT. She's a computer analyst, and she was noticing autism increasing in the population. She thought it was vaccines. She was sure of it because she was seeing this correlation. But when she put in the use of Roundup with genetically modified food starting in 1996, then in 2000, the use of Roundup as a desiccant, a drying agent, on all of our foods, she saw an absolute correlation between Parkinson's, MS, autism, cancers. Like, you should see her graphs. They are incredible. So it's our last interview. We are exhausted. I ask her a question. The answer is Roundup. I ask her another question. It's Roundup. And I'm like, and all of us are like this. We jaws on the floor, blown away by what she's telling us. And I had to change the documentary because I realized that the root cause of the increase in celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, musculoskeletal problems, neurological problems, probably had a root cause with our agricultural practices, and the absolute open slather of this product being thrown on our foods, not only genetically modified foods, but as desiccants on legumes and grains, around our nuts, our seeds, our orchards, canola, non-genetically modified canola, like you name it, they were throwing it on there. So she just explained that so well. But I realized there were other factors as well because, I identified 14 factors, but I realized that was the root cause. Then there was, we eat lots of it, we refine it, we take the bran out, we take the germ out, there's no nutrition, it's in everything, it's in Stramit, it's indoors, it's in, oh my gosh, it's just used everywhere. But being used everywhere, it's then sprayed. Like, I've just been to Carnarvon Gorge and I could not believe how much wheat is being grown between here, the Sunshine Coast, and Carnarvon Gorge, like a 7-hour drive. It was just wheat field after wheat field after wheat field. And I did a trip north to Airlie Beach just recently, another 12-hour trip, sugarcane. And I just, do we need that much wheat and sugarcane? Do we really need that much? You know, and most of it's export.
Something like 60% of the food that's eaten in the world comes from three main products, which is wheat, rice, and corn. And then there's the next 12 along, which potatoes and sugars and all that. But it's a factor of our industrialized food system that in order to sort of have these processes that are easy to move around, we need them bigger systems and it just we simplify it, whereas nature is inherently complex and our systems are inherently complex, and we need to have complex food systems to support the nourishment of our well-being, and our gardens themselves need the complexity. People come to me and they say, oh, I have a problem with this pest or with this. And I was like, well, you need to add more complexity into it. You need to add something that might attract a beneficial insect that will come in and eat that, or a little shrubby bush that will attract the little birds. They'll feel safe, and then they'll come out and peck your slugs off or whatever it is. The answer is always add more complexity, whereas our industrial food system is like simplifying things into like monocultures and then going, oh, we're having all these problems. Yes, of course you're having problems because it's not how nature works. Oh, we'll use all these things to kind of manage it, suppress it, and that's kind of killed the soil life. Oh, bother, well, we better add all this other stuff. So our food system is only works when we add the water, when we add the chemicals, when we add the protection. It can't grow by itself. What is going to feed people in the longer term is actually these more robust, resilient, integrated, diverse food systems which draw out all these different kind of nutrients out of the soil and provide us with this beautiful, bountiful selection of foods all the seasons around. And this direct relationship between that monoculture that you've just seen and how that's grown and everything that represents, from the economic system which it supports and the global trade agreements and all of those things, the subsidies. How much money does our government actually and global organisations pay to help that farmer grow that way? What if the subsidies were shifted and meant that regenerative food systems were supported? That you can't get the subsidy unless you're actually doing regenerative farming. Like, if that was the goal, rather than the goal of maximising output to export offshore, then we would have a completely different food system. We're sort of having this ground up bubbling of healing the food system from what people like you are talking about. But it needs to have this other system as well, I think, cracked open. And I have to say that I'm really excited to hear that this is starting to happen. In the UK, I met recently with the ministers for agriculture, and they're saying that right now they're opening up this new agricultural bill, which means that you only get the subsidies of farming if you've got ecological practices underpinning what you're doing. And I went, hooray!
That is such good news to hear, because you're right. The subsidies are all for these monocultures and not for people. Like, nobody's giving me money or you money. We're working, but in the end, it's not about the money. It's like, I know what you're like. You love your garden. You're in your garden. It's such satisfaction, and it's the same for me. But it would be really lovely to see these subsidies being for small farmers. And I heard Charles Massey say that 70% of people are fed by 5 acres or less. 70% of the population. We don't need these monocultures.
No, all of this research that's being shown across the world is saying that we can feed ourselves on small polycultural food systems, where there's a metabolism, like our waste go back as compost, and where I remember going to the summit that you organised a couple of years ago where Charles Massey was speaking, and he was talking about, just this small shift in the percentage of organic matter that we get into the soil, then soaks in, hundreds of thousands of extra litres of water, and, that it doesn't run off and cause pollution somewhere else. It actually gets drawn in. And so we start to heal the land, we heal the river systems, we restore the life in the soil, and it's also drawing down carbon at the same time. I mean, it's just every single way you look at it, it makes so much sense. And so, I think also what you're doing in terms of educating people who, like, on the consumer end, be able to ask for this food. And so, I mean, what you're doing with changing habits and what you're doing with all the education you're doing is getting people to say, actually, I don't really want to eat that anymore. I want to eat this. And when you start to get that, it supports the small farmer. It supports the regenerative farmer. And I'm wondering, have you seen any changes over COVID in how people are thinking about this?
Well, I couldn't get plants and I couldn't get seeds. So obviously, like, I was collecting all my seeds because I'm thinking, oh, I've got to collect seeds. So I've got that many borage seeds. If anyone needs borage, I've got it.
I've got 1 million or maybe 10 million mustard seed lettuce.
Yeah. But Jorianna,
like with the mustard seeds, you can eat the greens, you can sprout them and they make excellent sprouts. You can make your own little jars of mustard if you want to put that on your
Yeah. I'm finding more and more people are getting this because the whole COVID thing went, oh my gosh, I've got to be healthy. I better grow my own foods. The seeds all left. Everybody was, didn't want to miss out. And so more and more people wanting to grow food. And, of course, that's when we just happened to start the Incredible Edible Garden. So everybody wanted seeds and I noticed them swapping seeds. So we got a lot of people starting to do that. But I think that what I do the best is educate people about the food system. And since meeting you, Morag, and understanding Regenerative Farmer and Charles Massey and Charlie Arnott and RCS and all of these incredible people out there changing farming practices, I think that there is a real change, and people are really beginning to go, if I do not do this, then who is going to do it? And like I said before, we become activists by the foods that we choose. You are the most powerful activist by the food you choose, or the food you choose to grow, or where you buy your food. And you refuse to go to these big multinationals, and you refuse to buy packaged food, and that you make everything from scratch. And yes, it takes time, and yes, it takes learning, but this is what we have to do in order to save the planet, number one, the animals that are on the planet, the ecology of the planet, and human civilization. That's where I think we need to go. And it starts and ends with food. The food that you're growing, how you're growing it, and what you're consuming. And, I know that all those regenerative farmers, the permacultures, the biodynamic farmers, the syncanthropic, all of those are all these ways of feeding into the food system that will then give nutrition to the human, that makes the human think instead of being a sheep, because that's what I am seeing. I am not seeing humans thinking clearly. They are chained to the food system. They are sick, and therefore they're chained to the pharmaceutical system. They're chained to the agricultural system. And as soon as they break free of those chains, they become free. That's what I think. I think if you're in that agricultural food system and you're in that where you're buying packaged foods and you're at the pharmaceuticals having drugs every minute of your life, like I have a friend and he looks after older people, and he says there's blister packs full of drugs. They're taking 37 pills a day. When you're chained to that system until you break loose and realize the beginning starts with where you get your food from, what food you're consuming, and then you become healthy and you don't need the drugs. And then the pharmaceutical companies fall down and they don't become the elite anymore. The agricultural companies fall down. Nobody wants to buy Roundup or Glyphosate or dicamba or Paquat and all of those toxic atrazines, DDT, and oh my gosh. Who ever thought that it was okay to spray poisons on our food? Who ever thought that?
Let's start.
And the lies is what they're blatant lies.
It came with the separation. It came when food became a commodity as opposed to food is food. Food is what nourishes it. When we separate ourselves from the farming system, from the economics of the food to the economics of the household, and there's that separation, you don't see those causal effects. And when it starts to come back, I used to lecture in food politics at Griffith University, and I remember talking about all these things, and I could see people's faces, like some were just like shocked. Other people were going, what? Like when this knowledge is shared, it is shocking because we normally get it so packaged. And, say, for example, and eggs, right? You get them in this nice little container, and on there's this package that has these beautiful, happy chickens jumping around this grassy yard, where the actual reality is they're packed in these dreadful conditions. I mean, I know you're starting to crack that open a bit, but what I called it was a pastoral fantasy, that we got fed an image of what our food was and where it was coming from. And we believed it because we weren't there out in the field. We didn't know where it was coming from. And this kind of the clouding of the reality became so much so that we believed that this was a good thing, and all the marketing around that food, that all these different foods, like, that margarine was good for you. It's like probably all these beautiful pictures of these healthy, happy people eating margarine. Like we've got sold another reality, and we are trusting people typically. We believe what we're told. And so when we grow up seeing food pyramids and saying, replace your butter with margarine because that's the healthy option, you follow the advice of what you get at school and what the new local, health centre's telling you. And so I think it's really a matter of trying to unpack that and unpick that and to really show the other side of what's really happening. What's going on with wheat, what's happening in the food system, what happens at a dairy, what happens, how are your vegetables grown? We need to ask those questions. We also need to take personal responsibility, I think, a bit to kind of uncover and discover and become curious about it. When you pick up the food in the store, it's not like, oh, well, when you read a recipe and it says, okay, you need to get all these things. I think we need to sort of have next to questions like, qualification, maybe ask where that might be from, or is there a better way where you can get that rather than just a straight list of recipes, because it helps people to go that next step.
That's a brilliant idea. Make sure you go to the farmer's market for that one. Go to Changing Habits for the Spices.
Yeah. Look, it's important because it's, like you said, where it comes from, how it's grown is so important about the impact it's going to have on your health, but also the impact, like the social justice of it, the ecological justice of it, all those different aspects. And so, yeah, I think the education is key, opening up is key, constantly telling stories and helping to make it more accessible. So making good food more accessible, making the information about how you grow your food more accessible, and inviting people in to be part of this, and demonstrating that there are other alternatives, that it is possible to support your family and your community on small scale regenerative farms. We still have this thing saying, oh yes, but there's billions of people, that's not going to be possible. But yet we see how much food is wasted. I mean, just going back to that thing about food waste, with the figure is normally about 30-40% of food that gets wasted. I mean, I would hazard to guess that we were probably wasting about, I don't know, 80% of the food that's grown, simply because we don't eat all of it. We look at, my story all the time, I talk about pumpkin, for example. We look at a pumpkin and we wait for the pumpkin to be ready, and then we chop off all the skin, chuck that away, scoop out the seeds, chuck, and we're left with this one little bit of yellow, orangey stuff. It's like that whole plant is edible, every single shoot and leaf and flower. And so imagine all the pumpkin farms in the world, and all the sweet potato farms in the world, and all these other farms in the world, all of that food that's never eaten. It just gets round-upped, and so we actually, in actual fact, so clearly, we don't need all that space to grow these things. We need to shift the way we think what is food, how we eat food, where we get our food from, and what we're willing to eat and how we eat it. I mean, spinach can be millions of different things, really, can't it? It doesn't have to be the spinach leaf that's, and I think it's a conceptual shift, an attitudinal shift, a perception of what our food is and what it can be. And I think that's probably a key part of where we need to get that change happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've lost our way. We stopped cooking, so packaged foods, and we just have to go back to those two principles I talked about in the beginning. What did we do? Mm-hmm. We gathered food, we hunted food, we brought it home, we cooked it up, very simple, meat and veg, porridges or whatever it was. We did it. That's the way we did it. We didn't have it all packaged in plastic and everything like that and throw it in a microwave. And I think when we go back to our roots, like regen farming is really the roots of the way nature works. Permaculture is seed drops. Oh, look there, in the middle of my path, there's a lettuce or a coriander, you know. I've even got coriander and lettuce growing in the paddock. Oh, I love it. And then if we can get people to comprehend this, more and more people are going to start doing it. And I have to admit, I am seeing a swell, a real swell of people doing it. And you must see that too. You know, that wonderful swell of people that are realizing that food is connected to their health. And what's interesting is that the amount of medical doctors that are now beginning to see this. Not all, but there are some key people like our Australian of the Year, James Muckey. About a year ago, he realised that he's an ophthalmologist, and most of the people that he was dealing with were people with diabetes. What's the root cause of diabetes? The diet. So he now wants to change the dietary guidelines. Good luck to him. He's been with Greg Hunt, our health minister. He's with the National Health and Medical Research Council. He's on another board for the Diabetes Association. All these beautiful things he's doing. Then there's David Johnson, neurosurgeon in Brisbane, realised that diet and functional movement was probably more powerful than operating. So now his accountant's not happy because he's not operating as much, because he's now changing people's lives with diet and functional movement. Dr. Gary Fedke, incredible. Like, these are people that I'm meeting. Troy Stapleton. These are doctors that are changing paradigms. And that's what it is that we can't fight across paradigms, because this person thinks very differently to this person. But if we can move that paradigm towards us, towards regen farming, towards eating better, towards that, then we start to see that paradigm shift move more towards vitalism as opposed to mechanism, which is the way healthcare is done today, and the way food is done today is very mechanistically as opposed to vitalistically or holistically. Yeah. So I think there's a movement, and hopefully something like you and me just talking will help people towards that shift, that someone might say, hey, you should listen to these two young girls. How to grow it, how to eat it, and maybe they'll, and I do feel young. I'm 60 and I went better into my 60s than I did into my 50s. Yeah. That's how I feel. More energy, no aches and pains, just incredible. Mm-hmm. So, and that was just one food. And then I realized the story of wheat is the story of food. And that's, and then the farm, and then you, and
yeah. And it's amazing. And it speaks for itself, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that you do have such a level of vitalism, you're able to shift and change. And even though you were already very aware, I mean, this is what you're saying. It wasn't new information, but it's a deepening of a particular way of seeing it. So, I mean, I think too, I love what you just said about the paradigm shifting towards a vitalism. And what I feel what we really need to do is to celebrate the changes that we're seeing. That those people who are, the courageous edge workers, I suppose, moving into these different conversation space to celebrate their work and to really give recognition to those. Because sometimes people who are pushing those edges feel like marginal or marginalized. And I think, both from the grower's perspective, but also from the food producers, the medical, wherever you are, if you're willing to come into that space of exploring the edges of where it is that we actually need to go and finding out new forms of doing that, then I would love for us to be consistently saying thank you and acknowledging their work, and like you do. And thank you for everything that you do. It's just, as always, absolute delight and pleasure to talk with you. I feel like I wanted to keep talking with you for ages, but I know
we could talk forever, couldn't we?
Thank you for joining us on the Sense Making a Changing World show, Cyndi. I mean, what you've been talking about is absolute sense making, and it's a really great way to I think, talking about our food system, both from that nutritional perspective, but also the growing perspective, bringing together those things which strangely have been separated. It just needs to come back as sort of different aspects of descriptions of the whole foods movement, the whole foods, whole health, holistic health thinking. And it's just, like you said, everything begins and ends with food. And that's a great way to do it at a household, and wherever everyone can do that. We can all do that.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
All right. Well, lovely to have you on the show, and thank you so much again. And I look forward to meeting you up on the farm soon.
Thank you, Morag.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively. And call positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.